What is the connection between, or the misconceptions between, the Nephilim and the Anunnaki?
So the Anunnaki come from the Sumerian and Babylonian texts.
Those texts came from when?
Like 3000 BC.
3000 BC.
Yeah, like this is the oldest text that exists in the world. Like there's nothing older than Sumerian text. I mean, there's stories that predate these texts, but they're not written down. This is Sumer is the first place where we get written text. And they're in cuneiform and Akkadian, and they write about these Anunnaki. And there's this group of gods that, and sometimes they're in the underworld, and some stories they're in the heavens. Depends on what story you're looking at. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, it's the underworld gods, which is a misconception. People think that these are coming from above, but most of the texts describe them as in the underworld. Mm-hmm. But there are some texts that do describe them coming from the heavens, so that there is some credibility there. But they get lumped in with the Nephilim because the Nephilim are also described as these.
Oh, these are the tablets.
Those are the old ancient Sumerian tablets. Yeah.
Wow.
Those are from like 3000, 2000 BC, somewhere in between, 2500 BC. Yeah, super old. Now check this out, right? So the Nephilim are these like fallen gods. Sometimes they're called giants because Nephil can mean giant in Greek, but Nephil also can mean to fall. So depending on how you read it, it could be fallen ones or giants. And there's two different translations for that. In some texts they're the fallen ones. In some texts they're the giants. Or maybe they're both. Maybe that's a pun. You never know. But they get lumped in with the Anunnaki because the story is very similar as the Anunnaki, in the sense that there are stories of Anunnaki being cast out from the presence of Enlil. And they end up serving other purposes. And that's how they get... So there's a very similar story happening between the two, which I think there's some credibility to that. But this is where it gets crazy.
How the hell do you translate that?
I don't know. They can read that, though. People can read that.
Looks like chicken scratch.
Yeah, it does. Samuel Noah Kramer translated all these texts that I'm about to describe. And one of the texts that mentions the Anunnaki, there's a guy named, what's his name? Utnapishtim. And there's a couple different flood stories. One of them is called Artahasis. That's another guy. And the other one's called the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Yes.
And this guy, so depending on which story you're getting at, the guy whoever's in the flood story, he survives a flood that's...
Gilgamesh, I think it is.
Well, Gilgamesh, that's the name of the story, but the guy's name is Artahasis, who survives the flood.
Okay.
And he survives this flood, and at the end of the story, he lets off a dove and a raven and waits for 7 days for them to come back. This is exactly what Genesis says for Noah. When Noah is at the end of the flood, after 40 days, he lets off a dove and a raven and waits 7 days for them to return. It's exactly the same. They're literally borrowing from this story. So the story of Noah surviving the ark is actually predated by thousands of years in this Sumerian story. So there's two ways of looking at it. You can be critical and say, yeah, this is an ancient story, an ancient pagan story being repurposed by the Jews. Or you could say, this is actually so ancient and so true that it shows up in this other story in the ancient world. Depending on how you want to spin it, right?
Right.
You can make it positive for the Noah's Ark. Say Noah's Ark is so true that we find it in another version in a different story. Or you can say it's such a retelling of an ancient pagan story that it can't be true because this is already in a text from 1,000 years before Noah was ever talked about.
Right.
Because there's no mention of Noah until classical period, Hellenistic period, basically Persian period. If you want to be like, give him a little bit of maybe Persian period, but there's no mention of Noah before that.
So the story goes that the Anunnaki, the Enlil and Enki, created these Agigis who were supposed to terraform the earth, and they got tired of working or whatever, and then they created human beings somehow. Yep. Or they like sacrificed a god to create humans to be the slaves to do all this hard work.
Yeah, and Enki, and this is where I get into this is like Enki is this god in the ancient Sumerian stories who he creates humans, but he's also like a trickster. And he seems to always defy the will of Enlil. So he's almost like a proto-Satan character. where he cares about humans, but when Enlil wants to flood everybody, he wants to kill humans, Enlil, because he's sick of them. He wants to flood them out. They're all sinners. They're all dumbasses. But Enki saves them. Enki's the one that tells Arthur-Hassis to build the ark because Enlil's going to kill you guys. He gives them. He wasn't supposed to do that. He defies the will of Enlil. This also happens in the Greek mythology. When Zeus is fed up with humans, he wants to send a flood.
Right.
It's Prometheus who says, "Hey, Zeus is going to kill you all." Prometheus is the creator god, and he's a trickster. So Prometheus is the Greek version of Enki. And you can almost say in Judeo-Christianity, it's Satan that's that character.
And Prometheus tried to, I don't know where I'm pulling this information from, but I feel like I read this somewhere, but Prometheus
Probably from me and Giorgiani's talk.
He tried to trick Zeus?
When me and Giorgiani had our talk about Prometheus, we talked about this in depth.
Okay.
We went, that's probably where you saw it when I was telling you about Giorgiani. Giorgiani's really into this whole idea of Prometheus is actually Lucifer, but he's not the evil one. It's very Gnostic, and it's a very Gnostic idea in the sense that the good God is actually the bad one, and the bad one is actually the good one.
Right.
He's trying to give you the knowledge to save yourself.
And Prometheus wanted to save humanity from Zeus. And he tried to like trick Zeus by
he just went against his back.
There was like some sort of like animal that they were having a feast or whatever.
That's another one.
And he tried to trick him by giving him 2 pieces, and one of them was like looked like a bunch of meat, but it was filled with bones, and he thought Zeus would pick the wrong one.
Yes. The idea of Prometheus is to teach people that the gods can be manipulated and tricked in the right circumstances if you're slick enough to do it. It's almost like Prometheus represents the tree of knowledge. Take a bite, see what happens.
Right.
You know what I mean?
That's kind of he like sentenced him to like die a new death every day on a mountain.
He sends him up to the Caucasus Mountains where he's from, and he chains him up. I wish I had this one book that I have written by Carl Karenny about Prometheus, where he finds the oldest depictions of Prometheus from Etruscan art, from Greek art, and he's always depicted with his arms up like this, chained to a rock, like a crucifixion.
Maybe you could find that photo, or that image.
I think Christianity is drawing from these motifs and then repurposing for different. Look at that. That's how the oldest. Look at his beard and everything. It looks like so Christ-like. You know what I mean?
Wow.
That's Prometheus.
Wow. And this was drawn 500 BC.
That's the Etruscan spelling of his name.
BC.
Yeah. If you go down, it says it right there.
There's another one.
And there's another one. That's Prometheus. That's him being saved by Apollo and Hercules.
Oh wow.
Being taken off the cross, or being taken off of his. See, there's the eagle that's biting at his leg.
Yep.
Oh, check this out too. Talking about drugs, right? Medea.
Yeah.
The ancient witch Medea.
Yes. This is what Amun has tattooed on his head, right?
Yeah. She had a magic potion called Promethea, and it was the blood. Remember, we're talking about the blood of Christ being magic, and they're drinking in these Eucharists. This was happening for Prometheus back in the ancient world. Well, Prometheus' blood was mixed in a potion by Medea. The same blood that dripped from him while he was on the rock was made into a potion that can heal you and make you immortal.
No way.
Yeah. There's sources for this and everything. I could read the source if you want. You want to hear it?
That's Christ. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. It's called The Magical Promethean Herb. It's from Apollonius of Rhodes, 3rd century BC. Anyone can look this up. It says, Medea, 3rd century BC, Medea took a magic ointment from her box. This salve was named after Prometheus. A man had only to smear it on his body after propitiating the only begotten maiden, Hecate, with a midnight offering to become invulnerable by sword or fire, and for that day to surpass himself in strength and daring. It first appeared in the plant that sprang from the blood-like ichor of Prometheus in his torment, which the flesh-eating eagle had dropped on the spurns of the Caucasus. The flowers, which grew on twin stalks a cubit high, were of the color Corsian, saffron, while the root, talking about root cutting, that's where you get DMT from roots, while the roots looked like flesh that had just been cut. By the way, root cutters is the name of an ancient an ancient sorcerer. They're called root cutters because they cut roots to make drugs with.
Right.
So these roots have just been cut, and the juice is like dark sap of a mountain oak. To make the ointment, Medea, clothed in black in the gloom of night, had drawn off this juice in a Caspian shell after bathing in 7 perennial streams and calling 7 times on Brimo, nurse of youth, Brimo, night wanderer of the underworld, queen of the dead. The dark earth shook and rumbled underneath the Titan root when it was cut, and Prometheus himself groaned in anguish of his soul. There it is right there. There's a bunch of sources on it. There's a bunch of sources on it too.
That's wild.
Yeah. You could see you can see how look, it's not just that one source. There's a bunch of them. Mm-hmm. If you go, that's the one I just read. Uh-huh. If you go down, look, Perseus, 1st century BC, he mentions it too. Valerius Flaccus, up a little bit, right there. Valerius Flaccus mentions it. Seneca. So that's 4 different sources that mention this magic blood ointment of Prometheus. It's called Promethea.
Wow. So Medea.
Yeah. Medea is the one who made it.
So what do you make of the connections of the Anunnaki to aliens by Zecharia Sitchin?
Zecharia Sitchin is famous for that.
A lot of people are running with this now.
They run with it,
saying that this. I've had people on this podcast.
Yeah, they love that idea. I mean, look, I can't read Sumerian, so I don't know how he got. he's apparently he can. Other scholars,
Sitchin?
Yeah, Sitchin can. Other scholars of Akkadian and say that his translations are sound. That's what they say. I'm just saying what they say. He might be right. I mean, that's something I want to look more into. It's a fascinating theory.
And Sitchin,
and you know me, I don't just side with scholars on anything. I look to see what the argument is. Right. I want to know: are you right? Does the data support it? I don't care what the consensus is. I look at the consensus because I want to compare it.
Right.
I'm always looking at what they're saying versus what the person's challenging them with. Mm-hmm. And in the case of Zecharia Sitchin, he says that the Anunnaki are fallen Nephilim, fallen aliens that. And these stories are written about him.
But there's a lot of contention between his translation of the word Nibiru, the planet he says they came from. Yeah. Which Nibiru was like some sort of planet that was like between Mars and Jupiter, and it somehow got hit and transformed into Earth, like something like that. But I guess like there's a different translation of Nibiru. Apparently that's not what it meant. It didn't mean some sort of other planet.
Yeah, it's like another realm or something, like another heaven realm or something like that.
Yeah.
That's what they're saying it is. And Sitchin doesn't think that. He thinks it's a planet. I don't know. I don't know what to say on that.
And he connected it to the pyramids somehow?
Yeah. I don't know how he got there. I have to look into what he said, to be honest. But I did talk to my friend Josh Bowen, who's a Syriologist. I asked him about this. We did a video on it. It's got 1.4 million views somehow. But he says that here's where he thinks Zecharia Sitchin trips up. He says there's a lot of words in Akkadian that sound like it looks like 2 words together that sound like it might mean something else. For example, like we talked about this, how the word butterfly, we know what a butterfly is. It's a bug that flies around. But somebody in a different language 5,000 years from now might say, "Oh, it's butter that flies."
Right.
Butterfly.
A stick of butter that flies around.
So he thinks this is how he described it to me. My friend Josh, he said that Sitchin is doing this a lot. He sees words, and some of the stuff that he's translating might actually be there, but they're saying these words don't really mean that. They're using different context.
Right.
So, yeah. But hey, look, I'm willing to give it a shake. I'll look into it more. You know, I haven't dug deep into Zecharia Sitchin and the alien thing yet.
Right.
There it is, butterfly boys and girls.
Especially with the latest stories coming out about these UFOs and stuff.
Yeah, the government's saying that they're angels now.
Right now might be the time to start looking into that stuff. You know?
They're angelic beings. They're not.
Who's saying that?
A lot of people in the government now are like saying that they are
like Mike Johnson and those guys.
Those people. Some of them like deep in the government, or like I don't know who exactly it is, but the consensus seems to be in like the UFO community that they're like looking for the next coming of Christ, and they're like angels flying around, or enlightened beings that are flying around.